As a world, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement grow in global prominence in recent months. For people of colour and particularly the Black community, there has been more than a movement for change, but the reality of existence. With that thought in mind, and with the theme of right here, right now, or still here, right now, it's time to do more. Children's media holds the privilege, but also the responsibility to ensure that all young people see themselves in the media they consume, that this representation goes beyond performative gestures and stirs constructive change for not only the young people consuming, but those creating. It won't happen overnight, but it starts now and with us all. I'd like to introduce you to our panel today, who I'm sure will inspire and provide brilliant insight into what this change will and should look like. Firstly, we have Professor Kevin Clark. Kevin is a children's media consultant based in the US who recently published in Kidscreen, How to Move Beyond Tokenism in Kids TV. Kevin holds extensive experience in creative content development and inclusion strategy for numerous television networks, streaming services, production studios, as well as technology and toy companies. And we also have Adam Campbell. Adam joins us today as someone working within the digital side of children's media in his role as Director of Product at Azumi, a leading kids entertainment group providing gaming, broadcast TV and video on demand content globally. He's also co-founder of Persons of Colour in Play, Europe's fastest growing advocacy organisation for representation and inclusion of racial minorities in the video games and interactive entertainment sector. Thirdly, joining us today, we have Jacqueline Baker, who is co-founder of the BAME TV Task Force. The task force sprung up amid the Black Lives Matter movement and is lobbying for fundamental change in the television industry, stamp out racism and improve representation for diverse storytellers on screen. Next joining us is Larissa Kennedy. Larissa is an award-winning Black feminist social activist and community organiser, and currently President-elect at the National Union of Students, although we should say congratulations to Larissa, it's your first day in post, so congratulations. And finally, we have Miranda Wayland. Miranda is Head of Creative Diversity at the BBC, and in this role she's responsible for overseeing the overall on-air, on-screen diversity and inclusion strategies across output, supporting the commissioning teams and independent suppliers to drive change, increase representation and ensure the BBC delivers against its strategic goals and public purpose. So the first question I'd like to put to the panel, and if everyone could just come back with one answer on this, and what are the implications of the Black Lives Matter movement for the children's media industry? So one implication from each panelist, and I'll start in the order that I can see people on my screen. So Miranda.
I think the implications are profound for us as a sector. It gives us an opportunity to be much more embracing of difference and to be able to highlight the wealth that ethnic minority groups and inclusion really has to bring.
Okay, thank you. Jackie.
I think, one of the things that is crucial and one of the things that we outlined as a task force was just the importance of gatekeepers and ensuring that those who are creating content at different levels, whether that's someone who's on screen, off screen, editorial teams, commissioners, that they also reflect, the different communities that are in the UK. And I think, having that authentic voice is definitely one of the key things that has sort of sprung up from the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay, Adam, for you within the games industry and possibly wider?
Yeah, I'd say it's a general awakening that people have had to racism and systemic oppression. So I think it's fair to say that society is generally aware of racism, but it doesn't affect everyone. And for those it affects, it doesn't affect everyone in the same way either. Obviously, the catalyst for this was George Floyd's tragic death, which led to global protests. And as a result, I think that kind of clear image of someone suffering due to the brutality of the system was an example which made those who perhaps were apathetic at once to systemic racism to suddenly realise that it is a global problem. And also, I feel like for a lot of non-Black people globally, they started to see their friends and colleagues also show this shared suffering, which I guess represents that it's a very much a diaspora-wide global issue. So I think that awakening that's happened within the industry, hopefully that can be a catalyst for change.
Thank you, Adam. I mean, that global awakening, and to Jackie's point, in terms of gatekeepers, Kevin from America, what do you think the implications are?
So for me, I think the implications are this recognition of truth. And as Adam said, there can no longer be a denial of the impact and existence of systemic racism in our country, globally, and in our industries. And so that, coupled with the existence of privilege, how some people did not have to deal with this systemic racism, and the recognition and the truth that it exists, is here, and that there are varying degrees of privilege for some people who don't have to deal with this and for years have not acknowledged it. And so now it's in front of us and we have to deal with it.
Thank you, Kevin. And Larissa, what do you think implications for Black Lives Matter on the children's media industry?
As many of the panelists said, I think we've had an opportunity to really understand as a world for non-Black people what anti-Black racism really looks like, and specifically what anti-Black police brutality means. But it's also given us this tragic but perfect storm where we have to critique kind of what does it mean to reimagine justice through kind of an anti-racist lens. And I think that in answering the questions where and when, with the kind of themes around right here and right now, it also gets us to ask the question who. And so I really hope that children's media can be a force for giving the upcoming generation, children and young people, a chance to have agency as a positive force for change in this, and how we reframe justice in our minds and in our society through an anti-racist lens.
Okay, I mean, just to carry on from that question, just follow on for you, Larissa. How do you think children, young people feel, and are they reacting for a call for change and the outcry from the Black Lives Matter movement?
I absolutely think young people and children and there's kind of this great sense of agency to really drive forward change, because so often, like throughout history, young people have been at the precipice of change. They've been pushing for the things that other people haven't necessarily. But to see young people leading often these movements for change, and for transformative change, and to see the rest of the population kind of come in tandem with us is really, really powerful. But also to see children and young people being represented as positive force for change, because so often it's kind of this assumption that young people are being, quote, too radical or speaking too loud on something. And so seeing the recognition that actually we do need this kind of change that grasps at the root of inequality in our society, and seeing everyone come on that journey with us is really special, although it comes off the back of a very, very tragic time.
Okay, thank you, Larissa. Just general question now to everyone. I'll start with you, Adam, because I think that a lot of young people obviously are engaged in the gaming industry. But what should children be seeing from the media they consume? It's a kind of at the heart of our issue in the kind of children's media. But what do you think they should be seeing from the media they consume?
So, I mean, the video games industry, for those who perhaps don't know, is the biggest entertainment industry in the world. In the last couple of years, the revenues for games has actually exceeded sports. And previously, the last bar was film. So, as you can imagine, lots of people across the world play video games. It's one of the the most loved pastimes. I think more than half of all people in the UK play video games on one of various platforms, from mobile to console. And within that, you have many children who play games. Perhaps the stereotypical gamer is seen as a child. And if you're going to consume, a form of interactive media, which has many of the similar elements that you find in film or music or other mediums, you want to see characters that represent you, or you want to see variety in stories. You want to see depth to people's personalities. And I think one of the problems with games, as with many forms of media, is that sometimes what you tend to see on screen only really reflects the people that are making those experiences, or those who have the power or the access to make those experiences too. And I think, not just children, but everybody deserves to see themselves represented in media.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Kevin, just to what do you think the answer is? What should children be seeing from the media they consume? What do you think?
Well, I think seeing full and varied representations of themselves in their communities. There's a tendency to even when we look at diverse groups, to say, okay, Black people look this way and act this way, when there is there's a diversity within that group. And so I think helping creators and people who are decision makers to understand that just because you have a Black face doesn't mean that you can check the diversity box. There is, extensive diversity within each of these categories. So being able to present an authentic, a full, complete of the rainbow of all of these varied, diverse communities, they should be represented in digital as well as broadcast media.
And does that, in a way, that reflects the comment we had earlier about at this moment the implications of Black Lives Matter being this awakening? Are we looking at more nuance now? Do you think we're digging out the nuance that we need to?
Yes, so there is more nuance, and that is more of a reason why you have to make sure that your creator teams are diverse, because you can no longer rely on one point of view, and you can't rely on that point of view to also try and create and convey diverse perspectives. And so the tendency is to then go out and get one person from this group, from the diverse group, and they will then speak for all of the diverse communities, which is also not correct, because there is a plethora of diversity among Blacks and Indigenous people and all people of color. And so you can't just pick one and say you speak for everybody. And so it's even more imperative that we have diversity and inclusiveness among these teams, among the executive suites, among the decision makers.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I mean, Jackie, you talked earlier about the gatekeepers. So what do you think, how does that play into this idea of what children should be seeing from the media, and following on from some of the comments that Kevin was making?
I absolutely agree with what, Adam and Kevin have said. I think we often talk in terms of race, Black or Asian, but actually there's so much nuance within those communities. I'm West Indian heritage, but, even people who are African heritage, if you're Nigerian or you're Ghanaian or, you're Congolese, all those different types of groups of people, we all have different, histories and different customs. And, I think part of the battle really is that, yes, we are, it's not that we aren't seeing any diversity at all, but it's reflecting the breadth of that diversity, even if the team that is creating that content doesn't necessarily understand that point of view, because they don't, look the same as me or you. It's about actually asking those groups of people, actually, is this, an authentic representation of you? Does this reflect your community? Because I think it's so easy to lump people into the same category. And actually, as much as everyone on this panel, we've all been affected by, the very sad murder of George Floyd. We've probably all been affected in slightly different ways, because we all are having very different lived experiences. And I think it's important for particularly children's content, because I think we do have to understand that, you know, children growing up, if you are a black child, a mixed race child, an Asian child, you are going to have a different lived experience. And I think we shouldn't be shy about actually saying that. So I think that's why it's just so important to just have that nuance and reflect that breadth of culture. And actually, I think all these different cultures are great. So I would just think, you know, everyone, kids and adults, would just love to see that.
Okay, I mean, I just before I'm going to move on to having a look at what young people are saying. But before I do that, Miranda, what do you say to that particular question? Because you're head of creative diversity at the BBC. So I think the idea of what should children be seeing from the media they consume really it would be good to get your viewpoint on it.
Absolutely. I think at the BBC we are committed to continuing to make positive strides and reflecting diversity in all of its forms. And it's true to say that you cannot be what you cannot see. And if you look at your panel today, we would like to be seen for more than just the colour of our skin. We have more to offer. The breadth of who we are extends beyond the pigmentation that we were born into. And I think when it comes to content, it's really important that our young people not only feel proud of who they are and what they represent, and they can see that reflected in society, but actually our unique position as a public broadcaster is to be able to educate, entertain, and inform. And if we can take those three components to enable young people to feel that their lives and their stories have a place in society, but also beyond the colour of your skin, you have value because of your difference. That is the power of television. That in itself is what media should be doing. It should be taking the very best of us and reflecting that back. So we're incredibly proud to have this unique platform to be able to demonstrate that you as an individual, as a young person, learning and growing and becoming yourself, have a home in the BBC that can help navigate that for you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. But I think there'll be more sort of like, what more can we do around there? I think that's great to hear that. But in thinking about young people seeing themselves as agent for change, here's an example taken from one of our 8 research sessions. These sessions are available to view over the course of the conference. You can't miss them. Go on the platform and look for the bit which says research. And what was really good about these were there was opinions taken from children on how they see themselves within the movement for change. I'll give you time to read some of those comments which are coming in from young people. As we move on, you can see that frustration with the adult world, search for role models in terms of being looking for change. This was research which was available and was done on in America and in the UK, focusing more on movies, media. Okay, as I said, those are just some things you can think about. More information is available on the platform. And that looks at kind of research across coming out of COVID, but there's some stuff particularly on this particular issue. Okay, and as we can see, there are patterns that are there, which show that the fact that a lot of these views are supported by and large by millennial parents. So I'm just going to go back into another more questions actually, and I want to talk a bit about the adultification of black children. Do you think there's a responsibility for children's media to acknowledge this, and how? If I go to Kevin first, and then Larissa afterwards, and I'll come to the rest of the panel. But Kevin, give us an example also what you think of that idea of the adultification.
Right. So I think there's sometimes a tendency to um, present children of color as less innocent, and that in a way takes away from their humanity and their they can then be treated as adults, and we've seen that in with dire consequences here in the States in terms of uh, Tamir Rice being shot. You know, this kid is 12 years old, and so we need to understand that when we do that in children's media, it signals that these kids are not as innocent as other kids, right? And so that's one. We also see the hyper sexualization of girls, and in particular, girls of color. And so that again takes away from their innocence and them being viewed as children. And so in media, they're being forced to grow up earlier. They're being depicted as adults or adolescents earlier, which then allows for certain behaviors or things to happen to and with them because they're not seen as children. So, children's media needs to be cognizant of that, and the industry needs to be careful not to make adults out of children too soon. Let them be children. Let them be presented, in the ways that you would present other children's, with whimsy and wonder, and that they don't have to be adults so quickly. So I think media can go a long way to creating those images, not only for children themselves, but also for the adults, so that adults begin to look at Black children and children of color as children, and not treating them as adults.
Larissa, have you more to add to that? Thank you, Kevin. That was really insightful.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Kevin said. And I think it was interesting, Kevin, that you touched on kind of that nexus between being a young girl and being Black, and what it means for misogynoir to enact in kind of children's media, and how adultification can often mean that kind of the strong Black woman stereotype that we see attributed to Black women is actually also attributed to Black girls, and they're expected to kind of navigate a lot at such an early age. And so I think children's media really does have a role to play in combating that, and giving Black children, and particularly Black girls, a space to be children. So completely agree with everything that was said.
So there's clearly a problem, and I kind of open it up to Miranda, Jacqueline, and Adam. There's a clear problem identified, but I think part of it's about being quite practical and thinking, well, how do you spot that within children's media in terms of the practitioners? Where do we put the brakes on? Does it come down to the representation around the creative table?
At the BBC, we're very conscious about this particular issue. We have long understood that young people often aspire to be older than their age. And I can remember myself when I was growing up, I wasn't necessarily interested in content that was pitched for my age group, because I always felt the content for a couple of years older was more exciting and more provocative. So I think as content makers and editorial teams, we're very mindful that each generation is always looking to catch up to the one before. And with that in mind, we're very careful about the content that we put out there. We make it a point that we don't speak down to children, nor do we make content with an age range on it that's beyond the recipients that we're targeting. And we spend a lot of time really being very careful about the way that we portray young people, especially if we're looking at dramas or any other types of content, but we're not asking them to play ages or be involved in things that are beyond the age group that they're currently at the moment. So we're very conscious about the lens that young people see and view content. And also they have the ability to curate their own content. So if you look at social media platforms, or if you look at YouTube, they're creating content for themselves as well. So again, it's about how are they being informed about the information that they're shaping and the narrative that they want to see, with that particular lens on. And as a broadcaster of our size, we need to ensure that we are doing the very best by them, so that when they're creating content for their own, they're actually having some model or framework to work towards.
Well, thank you, Miranda. But Jacqueline, I mean, you've set up the BAME TV task force. Do you think that that TV and media could go further? How do you practically kind of stop this adultification of young black kids?
I mean, I think what I would say is, again, when it comes to sort of gatekeeping, I think particularly with the adultification of young black girls, I think it's beyond more than just kind of the strong black woman trope. It's also allowing little girls to just be vulnerable. We aren't all this strong black girl or black woman type. We also want to be vulnerable sometimes. Sometimes we're going to cry. We need to allow children to have the full spectrum of emotions that any other racial group would have. And I think that's really important. And I think, we've obviously identified this as an issue, but I think where the task force comes in, and the reason why we set up this group, is because we really do want actions, and we now need to address this clear, almost societal imbalance that we have, where, little black girls are being viewed very differently to their white counterparts. So I guess what I would love to see around those editorial tables is that balance being addressed specifically for children's media and children's content, so that, we see, for example, whether it's a cartoon or some other show where there is that vulnerable black character. Because, I have a 8-year-old niece, and from the age of 6, she started asking me questions because she could see that she was very different to some of the kids that were around her. And so I think for her to be able to visually see lots of different types of little black girls, some strong, but also some who cry and some who are vulnerable, it sounds like such a small thing, but actually that is exactly the type of thing that would have such a positive impact for all the little black girls and other races that are growing up. And that's personally something that I would definitely love to see.
Okay, Adam, in the digital industry, what does change look like? Does it look different there around that issue?
So I guess in a sense, I kind of work across two industries. There's the children's side of the industry, and then there's a video games industry. And one of them's further ahead than the other one. In the children's industry, we are starting to see more diverse portrayals. Like, it's possible for, a black kid to be a scientist, or to be a princess, or, to kind of go on a fairy tale adventure. These are perhaps things we didn't really see maybe 10 years ago or 10 years before that. But we're starting to see more of it. And I think, again, there's a lot to be said about gatekeeping, kind of like what actually goes through the gates. Because there are so many content creators, so many characters, so many stories and worlds which never get to find their way onto screen. And I think once we start diversifying that selection process, and we also make it easier in terms of platforms to get your content onto them, we'll definitely see more diverse portrayals, but it does take a conscious effort. On the other side of that, I guess video games, and just kind of talking about the diverse portrayal of black children, I'd love to be able to say that there's a starting point to improve from, but I don't remember the last time I saw a black child portrayed in a video game. And I think there's a problem there already. It's kind of like, it kind of touches on many different subjects. Like when you see a film which is based in the future, are there any black people or any other ethnic minorities? If there are ethnic minorities, are they based on some kind of strange metaphor for race? For example, there might be a race of aliens which represents native people in America. And it's those kind of lazy portrayals you do tend to see. So I think one starting point would be, firstly, can we start portraying black children and children of colour in these experiences? And then when we do, can we give them those diverse personalities? And as I said, the video games industry is a bit further behind TV and film, but we need to get to a point where those making the decisions are more diverse. we do leave budget and time and space to bring on those experiences as well, because it's not just great for us, but it's also great for the whole audience out there who wants to see something a bit different.
Okay, I mean, I think that speaks to the idea of that nuance, that the ability at this point to have their conversations where you can say, hang on a sec, and you can start digging out the nuance, which maybe it's a phrase there, digging out the sort of line, that's not acceptable, that's not acceptable, you need to change it like this. But from the video games industry, that leads me on to the next question, really, which is it's a very commercial industry. So recently, advertising heavyweights, including Common Sense Media, have joined the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, using economic power to boycott Facebook ads. What do you think about the power of economic boycott? I'll go first to Adam on this, back to you, and then on to I'll bring in some other panel members.
Yeah, I'd say quite simply it does work. As much as you can raise the ethical implications of social media on, elections, on racism, on sexism, all of the things that social media has an impact on, ultimately there are people who do hold the power of these organizations, and their views tend to lean towards where they're going to get the money. At the end of the day, capitalism does fuel a lot of the behavior of corporations. And it does work when boycotts happen. So recently, 2 major video games console manufacturers pulled out of advertising on Facebook. And alongside all of these other boycotts, it did have a major impact on Facebook's stance on hate speech. So I'll definitely say that it's part of our responsibility as organizations to recognize that there's a problem and move our money into different places.
Mm-hmm. And I'm clearly, I mean, with those doing that, that's great. But then also the lens could possibly turn on them to say, well, hang on a sec, we want more diversification in your actual games. So going on to Kevin, in terms of the commercials angle, what do you think of that?
So yes, I think it works because companies and organizations oftentimes may not do what they should do, but they do what they have to do. And so we have seen that here in the States. We have seen now that sports teams are reconsidering their mascots after years of saying, we will not change. And when people start discussions of boycotting, when people start saying that these organizations will be punished in certain ways, then organizations that want to survive will then start looking at the potential of making these changes, and not for any altruistic reason, not for the morality argument that has been made for years. It comes down to economics, and so for many of them, for some of them, they do have a reckoning and they want to change, but economics cuts through all of that, and we as people of color also need to understand our economic power. The amount of money we spend is enormous. And when we can make choices about where and where not to spend our money, that has an implication on how these corporations deal with issues of diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I mean, I'm going to turn to Jacqueline now, and do comment on that if you'd like to. But one question, I think, to you, because I know that we've got a limited time, and there's actually quite a lot of questions actually that people are letting people know. You can submit questions at any time. In the end, we will look to kind of answer them. But can you tell us a bit more about the creation of the task force and the letter? As someone fighting for practical change, what was outlined in the letter, and how did you find the process of collating signatures?
Absolutely. So the task force has about 500 members, and there are 4 of us leading it. Myself, Vivian Igiridu, Carissa Jumu, and Abby Kumar. We all come from different sectors of TV, and essentially we came together because we were meeting in a society called the BAME TV Society, where we invited hundreds of other people of colour to speak to us about their experiences in the TV industry. And, we really realised there were just so many identical, quite negative, actually, experiences. And I think, you know, I'll certainly speak for myself. You know, there were so many people who were coming to me personally as well, and explaining to me that they'd had awful experiences, whether that was bullying or a microaggression or just being made to feel uncomfortable, but also then feeling there was nowhere they could speak to about that because they were worried about being blacklisted, losing their job, getting a bad reference. And I think, you know, it really sort of got to a point where I just thought, hey, this isn't okay. And, you know, what really sort of cut through, I think, to me was speaking to people and that hopelessness where they actually thought, oh, but this is just how it works in TV. And I just thought, well, no, this isn't how it needs to work. And actually, if you feel like that, then we actually do need to change that. So, so from that, the four of us got together, put together a letter which we really wanted to sort of outline the experiences that we were having in that letter. But what was really crucial for us was, we didn't want to just go there and complain. We wanted to say, look, these are the experiences that we're having, and these are the solutions that we think we'd like to put in place that we feel would address those problems. And if you don't agree that these are solutions, let's have a conversation, let's work together and, make sure that we can create change, because clearly there is an issue that needs to be addressed. So one of the kind of research that came out of that was that, 75% of Black women at mid-level were deciding that they wanted to leave the industry purely because of, their sort of mental well-being was being affected. But also, diverse teams do make business sense. And, we also have looked at research which shows that, top tier teams, professional teams are, a lot more effective when they do have that diverse makeup. So what, we kind of realized there's a bottleneck here. Why is this not translating? So we got together and we had such a phenomenal response. I mean, we had emails from people saying, thank you so much for articulating something that I didn't even know how to say in that letter. People really felt heard and they felt seen. And the response we got from the broadcasters, within 5 days, we'd met with BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and, we were meeting with, the head of content, the CEO, the director general, people who, particularly when you're at a mid-level, you don't expect you're going to be able to meet with those people and actually be able to express your concerns. So, we've just had a really positive response with people really keen to sort of work with us and, push initiatives through and discuss them and see what's working and what isn't really. So, but I think the key thing for us really was just deciding that we really just wanted change. And, we didn't just want a conversation or a committee or a report. We wanted to find out what are the tangible changes that will be made, that we will see, that, newcomers to the industry and those already in the industry will see. And I think, I've just been, I have to say that I feel so positive about the meetings, because it was quite a tough letter to read. We were very plain speaking, we didn't hold back. And, for us to be able to go into those meetings and meet with people who were like, you know what, you're absolutely right. There are things we need to change. We have things in place, but we can make it better, has been fantastic. So, I think one thing I've really learned from this experience is it is so important, even when you feel like you're not the most important person in the room, to actually just speak up and actually highlight this is the issue, but also to say, and maybe we could fix it like this. And I just think that, we've definitely got a good response from broadcasters because of that.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm going to turn to you, Miranda, with the next question. Just following on from what Jacqueline has says, I think that having been someone who's worked in the industry both privately and also on the BBC, I was on the BBC Trust previously, but I think that within the industry in the wider world, there can be a fear of discussing race and seeing race as a sensitive topic, particularly when you are digging out the stuff that just needs to be dug out, that needs to be highlighted. Do you think that the conversation has changed? Jacqueline feels very positive. get a sense that there is that positivity. But within your work, do you find that the conversation has changed? People are being more practical, there's more openness?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before I answer that, I just wanted to reflect on Jackie and the team that we met. And if you're looking for some exceptional role models who absolutely embody what it means to reflect diversity in its fullest form and to actually speak to difference, you couldn't hope to find much more eloquent people and much more passionate and driven people such as Jackie and the team. We were absolutely, and I speak not just for the BBC, but I know for all the major broadcasters, they were absolutely impressed and feel empowered to be able to take on some of the suggestions that were made for change across our industry. So I just wanted to recognise what you've done to help drive this agenda forward. In relation to the question that you ask around race, I think, as a sector, and not just our own, if we're being really honest, the conversation around race and being uncomfortable to talk about race has been long held, whether it's been in the educational system or whether it's been in the creative system or many other bodies that we intertwine with as we grow up. I think the huge difference and shift, as we alluded to right at the beginning of this conversation, was with the tragic death of George Floyd. There was no way to hide the fact that there really is an issue in society which is having a profound impact on everything else that we encounter. And so to be uncomfortable to talk about race is okay. To then continue not to embark on it is problematic. And I think what you're finding now is that there is a real emphasis and will from those people of colour who are ready to take that step and have that conversation with our counterparts who may be struggling to find the terminology, may be concerned about causing offence. I think there is an absolute understanding that if we continue to put this conversation on the back burner, we not only harm our current future, but the future of the very young people that we've been discussing today. So it's no longer open for debate. It's now time for us to speak upon it, because if we're serious about eradicating racism in society and in the workplace, then it starts with a conversation. And one of the questions you asked earlier on was about how young people really view this. And for a number of young people I speak to, the concept of racism is foreign to them. The fact that we would exclude people because of the colour of their skin, or that we make a conscious decision based on someone's gender or their age, is very foreign, because they don't see people through these very silo lenses that we often refer to individuals by. So there really is an absolute need for us to be able to get comfortable with talking about race and to find a language and a resolve that makes that the death and the murder of George Floyd to be the very last thing that we actually witness in society that speaks to this particular issue ever again.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. I'm going to turn to Larissa now. Larissa, you're president of NUS. I said congratulations. In terms of education, what do you feel needs to be done to ensure that change happens systematically and systemically?
I'm really glad that you said systematically and systemically, because I think this is about working in tandem with all educational institutions to really grasp at the root of racism. And I think that particularly needs to happen in the curriculum. I think we need to be seeing not only kind of the representation of Black excellence and examples in history where Black people have given extraordinary contributions, but also the space for Black mediocrity, and why is it that we learn about kind of, mediocre white families all of the time, and we don't get to access kind of Black mediocrity. I'm a big proponent of Black mediocrity. And I also think that we need to be looking at who our educators are. I kind of reached out to students in my membership about what they would want to see, and they said kind of those studying media were thinking about kind of media trainers and diversity in those teaching them, and what that says for the pipeline of people getting into this industry. But of course that counts for all other industries as well. And I think there is a context that we're seeing not only in the UK, but in the US, in South Africa, in many countries across the world, where students have been at the helm of this movement to kind of redress these historical wrongs that have so often been upheld, from the Rhodes Must Fall movement in Oxford to other examples across the world on students' campuses, where they're saying, actually, let's kind of take this down and erect something that really reflects the values that we have today. And education, as well as kind of the curriculum and the educators themselves, is of course now tied into all sorts of other systems through kind of the marketization of education. And so universities in particular have often some quite awful links to anti-blackness and how it's reproduced across the world. So I think there are then three levels to how we need to redress that.
Okay, thank you, Larissa. I'm going to go back to Miranda now, because I think it's a good time to mention that as part of our Inclusivity Now strand of the conference, there's going to be a deeper look into the BBC's 50/50 initiative. Where does the BBC sit on guidance, mediatory and economic imperatives for producers to get change done right for the future?
I'm really
And is it
excited
enough?
about the work. Well, well, I'm really excited about the work that we're doing on the 50/50 project, which originated with a view on expanding contributions to make gender balance a thing within our organisation. And that has been so successful that we're expanding that now to look at ethnic minority groups, contributions from people from a lower economic background, and people with disabilities. So I think it has the ability and the tool to be able to drive change on screen. And as we already discovered, it's really important that we reflect our audiences so they can see themselves reflected in the content that we make. I think in terms of the work that we're doing in other aspects, working diligently with our editorial teams, as we already mentioned in this conference, it's those decision makers and those people that are commissioning content that we are working with really strongly to make sure that they are embracing and reflective not only of ethnic minority groups, but the nuances of the very stories. The experiences of a black woman will be completely different to the experience of a black man, and it's not a case of us just being able to put one tag or label over it and thinking job done. So our editorial and commissioning team are very fully aware of that and are really working hard to be able to bring those stories to life as authentically as possible. And Larissa spoke really well about the importance of education. And again, just because of the very nature of who we are and what our ethos is, which is to inform, educate and entertain, we're able to use our educational arm of our organisation and use BBC Bite Size to help educate the next generation coming through. So having been in lockdown for 11, 12 weeks, most of the country have been absorbing and consuming our content to educate their young people and their children. And we have a platform of content that really speaks to the Black and Asian history that often isn't reflected in the curriculum. We work with our program makers to make sure that the content that we've got in terms of stories such as Will Britain Ever Have a Black Prime Minister, Black history, and Black stories are accessible to everyone. So it doesn't fit in that wonderful Black History Month in October, but actually it's prevalent throughout the year. And I think that, to me, that is one of the biggest steps that our industry can take, which is to stop siloing content from ethnic minority groups into a particular month and therefore reinforcing the message that it's niche content. And I'm really proud to be working with the BBC where they get that and the importance that we just don't keep tagging things on for effect, but we actually weave it into the whole calendar of content that we make.
Okay, thank you. Just a general question to everyone. I mean, I think we've in the way I asked you about what the implications were at the outset. I'd just quite to ask you what you think the advantages are. Just kind of one idea about the advantages for creating more inclusive media for children, and in turn for children as consumers, I think, as well. I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple advantages. I think in terms of creating content which is diverse and inclusive, it can build, confidence of children. They can grow up to be, all of these amazing professions that you tend to see represented on TV, except that face is also theirs. And it does make me reflect back to when I was young. I didn't see kind of like an inspirational figure that looked like myself when I wanted to get into video games. And I know that's going back a while now, but I always do think about that. So giving kids the confidence and the room to be themselves, whether they are, scientific or they're in fact mediocre or they're vulnerable, I think that's one of the really big driving forces. On the other hand, there's a strong economic argument for digital industries. So, I mean, there are a few statistics I'm aware of as well, actually. So, this is from UKI, who's the UK Interactive Entertainment trade body for the video games industry. So, we're about 10% ethnic minority in terms of our overall makeup, which has kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. It's slightly higher than it was before. About 40% of that is actually international as well. There are definitely more ethnic minorities who could be included in this industry. You see that in film and TV, those percentages tend to be a lot bigger, especially in the capital. And we're always talking about skill shortages. But if we're able to include more of the population, then perhaps we could plug that skills gap. And we do need to consider that when we have more diverse content, we can find new markets, we can find new interests. All of these TV series and games which are struggling to maintain the same sales. If we do start to utilize more cultural ideas and characters, then that's another way in which we can start to boost those sales.
Okay, thank you. So there's confidence and there's an economic argument and maybe increasingly an economic imperative if we all use our buying power. Kevin, what do you think on that question? So the advantages of creating more inclusive media for children children as consumers.
I'll build on what Adam said, and I'll be quick. I think looking at the intersectionality of people, right? Not just skin tone, but culture, language, gender. I think the more we can deal and present that intersectionality of people, I think the more understanding and education that will come out of that. I also think from an economic standpoint that we are striving to get seats at the table to impact shows. But I also think the next step is for us to really think about having our own network, creating our own distribution, commissioning, so that black people can drive the creation of children's content, so that Black children and children of color can actually have other choices. So I'm really excited about the possibility that in addition to us wanting to have a say in a particular show or a particular network, that at some point we will get to the stage where there will be a Black children's network, and we will be able to have really a huge impact on how Black children and children of color are entertained, educated, and taught.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to come back at the end to each of you and ask you to give me one tip for instigating and implementing changes to ensure inclusion of all. So you can think about that. That's your kind of your brain working in two different spheres. Think about that, and it's got to be short as well, because we've got time now for some questions which have been coming in. I want to make sure that we actually do get round to those. And if I can ask in the classic tradition, if panelists can keep their answers short on the questions, and I can kind of get through to them. So you're going to have to excuse me, everyone, because I'm on two screens. I think everyone's, since Zoom started, you're on like your iPad, your laptop, and your phone. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I've got the questions coming off on my iPad, so they're going to come up over there. But the first question I'm going to take is Alex Washington, and I am giving Alex a name check when I can. Oh no, hold on. Where is Alex's question? Okay, Alex Washington, and his first question, which I don't seem to be able to have on my list coming through here. I'm going to come back to Alex's question when it comes back on here. But there's a question also which has come in on mass happiness, from mass happiness or something, I think. What's the panel's advice on how we get our authentic ideas produced? The problem we often encounter is there are lots of others presenting or writing our stories, interpreting our stories in their way, not to mention them keeping the money. How do we get past the gatekeepers, which is, Jacqueline, you mentioned the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers decide what the audience wants to see and hear, etc., despite an authentic product, an idea often being groundbreaking and setting trends. Should we simply self-produce, Kevin's point, and or walk away from the mainstream, such as the BBC, and take advantage of the plethora of digital streaming that may deliver more creative authenticity and create control to Black and other ethnic groups? So it's a question from Mass Happiness. I think that's the name of the person who's put that one in. Your parents were very good to give you that name. If I go to Miranda, because that's Kevin's point is like, yeah, let's maybe have our own channels. Miranda, people pay for the BBC. So what do you think to answer that question?
I had a feeling you were going to throw this one to me.
Oh, yes.
I think there's always, good content always has a place to be shown. And I think whether or not you find alternative platforms to show it, whether, as I said earlier, you use YouTube or any of those other streaming platforms, it's important that the stories are told. The BBC, we have a 2.1 million diversity fund specifically designed to support and author diverse content. So those stories that you're talking about, the ones that you feel aren't being able to make it to TV, can have a place. And I'm happy to share after this, so it's accessible with you guys, exactly how you get access to the fund, who it supports, and also how you can submit content to us and your programme ideas. And we have that on our pitch portal through the commissioning website. It's imperative that we get those stories and the diversity of stories through. And as much as I would love you to be able to feel that you can bring those stories to us, the importance is that we get those stories told. So I would actively engage you to either bring those ideas to us or actually speak to any of my other counterparts in the broadcasting industry, because at the end of the day, if we've got great content that benefits all of our audiences.
Okay, well, I'm just going to follow up on that question from Jacqueline, because I think the implicit thing on that question was about the gatekeepers. So it's about kind of the commissioning editors actually spotting what is an idea which is relevant. So Jacqueline.
One of the proposals from the letter that we put forward is about specifically authorship from Black, Asian and other minority ethnic backgrounds. And the reason why we included that is exactly to that point, which it is very important for people from those communities to tell our own stories, because authentic, it's not just about diversity, it's about authentic storytelling as well. And I think from my perspective, I really see it as a two-prong kind of attack, if you don't mind me using that word. I think absolutely, if you're producing content, tell your authentic story. But I believe in inclusion, and I don't believe that you should not go to the mainstream, because I think it's important for the mainstream to see that we aren't just a niche content, all that niche content comes from our community. We're all license fee payers, and so I see no reason why we shouldn't be on BBC as well as BET. And I think what I would say is, if you're not getting traction, I think a useful tool is to, build up your audiences online, build up your audiences on socials, so that when you go into that meeting room with that commissioner and you sit down and you say, so I've actually got 10 million followers on, I don't know, Instagram or Twitter, or my YouTube channel is attracting X amount, you can actually back that up and say, there is appetite for the content that I'm giving you, and I'm also allowing you to engage with someone who is from the community and who can tell that story in an authentic way. Because I think one of the issues that we've come across is, there is that nervousness about, when you do engage content from a certain community, is it going to land? And, from my perspective, it's a benefit. You can say, I am from this community. I understand the nuances. I understand why this works. But also, I'm demonstrating to you that there's an appetite for this. And not just from people who look like me, but from the breadth of the various different communities, that are within the UK. So definitely, I would just say, sorry, I'm going on too long, but I just don't want people to give up if they feel like they're getting the door shut in their face, because it's so important to see those diverse stories.
No, I understand that, and Rebecca Atkinson, who asked, was quite keen for the your VME task force letter to be produced, and I'll just say now that the URL for that letter will be put in the blog report from this session, which will be out later on today. There's a question from Lucy, who says, "Do you think is it just as important for people who aren't of colour to champion projects for better representation?" Who I'm going to take that to? I'm going to go to, everyone's nodding. Adam, Larissa, I'll just come to you to make sure you get into this. What do you think, Adam?
Okay. Absolutely. We live in the same world together, and I think especially where minority voices are often silenced, or they may not be confident enough to step up. I think your colleagues and your counterparts should be an advocate. They should say, this person's got an idea, or have we considered that these stories could be told? Because ultimately, we do have to work on that solidarity between people and between communities in order to move forward.
Okay, and Larissa?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is I completely agree, and I think that it's so important to have allies in this movement, but to remember that ally is a verb, and it's something that you have to live and breathe every day. It's something that you have to continually learn and unlearn and continue to do that work. So I'd really urge people kind of beyond this 6-week period that we've had of people accessing that knowledge and that education to continue to do that so that they can be the allies that their Black colleagues need in this space.
Okay. My personal experience, I think 10 years ago, if I was around the table, I'd probably be the only one talking about it. But now, it's kind of like everyone's kind of talking about it and saying we need to do more. And maybe that's what this moment is about, with everyone out marching and everyone kind of saying, well, this is a moment that we've all come to globally, which is what we talked about. There's a question from Narissa Holder Hall, which I want to take. Do the panelists have any ideas about how to hold media companies accountable around whether they commit to diverse representation, and also how content is produced and whether people of colour are at the table? In a way, for most leaders across different organisations, on your in tray is COVID, and now this issue. So this is in your intro. You have got to do something about it. But what do the panel think about that? Again, I'll ask you to be very quick. Who hasn't spoken? Kevin, I'll go with Kevin first. And then I will come to you, Miranda, don't worry.
Well, I think until we tie these diversity and inclusion initiatives to executive performance and executive compensation and organizational goals, that's a way to make sure that they happen, and not that people just write statements and give lip service. To connect it to the business end of those organizations and those people.
Okay, and Miranda?
A couple of weeks ago, we launched our £100 million investment to diversity and inclusion, which is hopefully going to be the game changer that we need to see better representation on and off screen. And underpinning that is an increased diversity target to see better representation from not just ethnic minority groups in production, but also those from socio-economic backgrounds and disability. And we are tightening up our monitoring and tracking of that spend and the production companies that make content for us. At the end of the day, they're providing a service and they need to meet our requirements.
Okay, right. I'll give that question over to Miranda and Kevin, because there's another question which is coming from Shabnam Razai, which is, as a person of colour, I find culturally that art and artists are not as encouraged as real professions, such as doctors, lawyers. In my culture, Iranian, how do we change our internal cultures to support artists so that more of our stories can be told? And if I give this one to Adam and then Larissa.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. Again, thinking about my own experience, saying that I wanted to work in video games rather than be a scientist is maybe a bit of a shock to a lot of people. But it does come back to a couple of things. There's the economic argument. I mean, this is an industry that's huge, it's powerful, there's lots of money, there's, there are endless roles in all sorts of fields, from maths to business analysis. So it is a real industry, but I think that it's important for the video games industry to get more involved in education programs and communicating with people about the benefits of the industry and of the market. Myself, I do often go into colleges and universities to speak to people about this sort of stuff. And I do think, as well as us asking the questions of industry, can you help or can you do this, they should also extend their hand as well where they can.
Okay, and Larissa, I'm just mindful of the time. I can probably overrun by a few minutes, and I do want to kind of have that last challenge I put to you. So Larissa, on that question.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. I think it's interesting because there's the internal kind of what are we encouraged to do and what are we given kind of the space to imagine that we're able to do when we're growing up, but also the kind of systemic barriers and older generations having known the realities of those, and that being often the rationale for why we're encouraged into certain industries or that kind of thing. So I think we have to address both in order to kind of crack this. And I also think that when we're looking at kind of this pipeline for the next generation of the creators and the people who are going to be delivering on this content, it's so important to have role models and people like those on this panel who are able to kind of extend the ladder back down. And so when we have students and young people who are trying to break into this, how can they kind of actively be working with those who have managed to do that in an authentic way? So I think that's all from me on that one.
Thank you, Larissa. And then this isn't a question, but it's actually from Kate Canning. It's just she wanted to thank you all for putting across so cogently the BLM and BAME issues, which have shamed and shadowed our lives for so long. And she says, I too was brought up by my father not to see gender, colour, cultural divides. Got a shock when I reached the real world. Thank you again. I just read that out because maybe it links into what we were talking about from the research about how young people see themselves and how they kind of go into the world. And as older people, we have to kind of, in a way, bat away, dig out the nuance and say, right, we're getting the path clear for you. But finally, the one tip for instigating and implementing changes to ensure inclusion for all. And there are prizes for anyone who can give one tip in one word. I have said to be quick. So, Miranda.
My tip will be that I make a commitment to mentor someone for 6 months who is associated with the Children's Media Conference. That's how I am committed to making change. So if the Media Children's Conference wants to select someone, I will mentor them for 6 months.
Fantastic. You heard it first, and I think we recorded it, Miranda. But it was a very good offer. Thank you. Jacqueline, one tip for instigating and implementing changes.
I think the tip I would give is just to speak up. It's not always easy, and sorry, I know this isn't one word. It's not always easy. It's very difficult, but I think it is important to speak up. Speak to that senior person, and see what resolutions you can create from there.
No, speak up. That's 2 words. That's fine. Larissa.
I tried.
Sorry, this won't be one word either. I think where education and media convene is the power to empower people to reimagine. And so continue to empower people to reimagine the world as it is, to build something better. And that's kind of my tip to people.
Okay, Kevin, empower. Yes.
2 words, network and support. Jackie's letter is totally applicable to what's going on in the States. And so we need to all network together and support each other so that all of us can create the content that we know should be out there.
Okay, Adam.
1 word, and I'll give an example. My 1 word is accountability. And an example of how that can work is for all the organisations that say we support Pride, we support Black Lives Matter, it's your responsibility to now publish and show how you're going to be accountable to those causes, and it's something I'll be lobbying for.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's been a really, really great session for the Children's Media Conference. We had it there, network and support, accountability, Miranda's offer to mentor, Jacqueline said speak up, and Larissa said where the intersection between education and media, we have to empower and allow people to reimagine. So CMC, as part of the Right Here, Right Now mission, CMC is exploring some of the themes that we have discussed today. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I think it's been a really, really interesting, fantastic conversation. So CMC, part of the Right Here, is exploring some of the themes we discussed today in the Inclusivity Now strand of content, where there are 10 videos with different practical perspectives on changing mindsets, access to the industry and representation. And those themes are also addressed throughout the video on demand content for the conference, all made by volunteer efforts across the kids sector. And clearly inclusivity is on people's agendas. We can be sure the topic will arise again in tomorrow morning's question time panel with Russell T Davies, Baroness Beeban Kidron, Tracy Brabin MP, and Ollie Bray from the Lego Foundation, and Charles Lauder from the Indie Club. We'll discuss the future for children and media as we come out of COVID and answer your questions again. Information and all the live sessions for the rest of the week is available here on the portal and the CMC website, and in the shiny new app, which is kindly sponsored by S4C. And finally, this is your first chance to back chat. The chat function on this webinar is opening up now and will be live till 5:45 p.m. This is your chance to discuss the session, chat to other delegates and speakers, I think some of whom may remain on the chat, and just hit the message bubble icon on the top right. And from all of us, a big thank you to the CMC tech team. From me, thanks to all our panelists for the time you've taken to share your valuable knowledge and experiences. It's much appreciated. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you.